Everyone watching. For our final project for our comms and media class, our group decided to talk about the first settlements of Fitchburg until the Revolution, as our title suggests, and which focuses, of course, on Fitchburg's earlier days post its founding, circa the American Revolution, and sometimes post-Revolution, all primarily during the 18th century or 1700s. In this video, again, we will, like I said, it will be an overview of the early history of the town of Fitchburg. And we've worked through various sources, primarily thanks to the Fitchburg Historical Society, to get as much information on this as we can. Again, this is just a short overview of our project to see our main, almost everything we picked out into a spliced together project or portfolio of sorts. You can see that on our exhibits at Omeka.
In the early settlements, really early revolution, and actually pre the existence of Fitchburg as a town, it was actually known as Lunenburg before it became its own thing. But during the 1663, the land itself had a lot of changing owners and had a lot of conflicts with the Indian tribes that prevented a large settlement in that area. In 1675, King Philip, his war drove out the Nashaway Indians, and the area offered good hunting opportunities for the colonists that arrived there. In 1735, Samuel Page's son established a garrison, which is now known or became a cornerstone for the existence of Fitchburg. Settlement slowed down due to the war with England and France. Indian bounty hunters were encouraged to attack the garrisons. Indians, or in 1748, Indians carried off John Fitch and his family to Canada, and they were kidnapped for a long time, and they were held ransom by the tribe until there was an agreement meant, and they were allowed to come back home. Although, actually, during this time, on the trip back, John Fitch's wife did die on the trip. And until 1761, war and hostilities with the Indians, and a lot of people lived off the farms. So in 1764, John Fitch, Amos Kimball, Samuel Hutt, Ephraim Whitney, Jonathan Wood went to the general court and requested that Fitchburg become its own town separate from Lunenburg due to the distance of Lunenburg itself, as a lot of the services were actually on like the eastern side of the town and Fitchburg was on the western side. So in order to go to like the church or other community aspects, there was a really, really long walk. And so there was a need to separate it. This request went through many town government things, such as a couple governors and whatnot, and it was accepted. When the town separated at this time, the population was around 250, and there were only four main roads of Main, Blossom, Pearl, and South Street. All streets that do exist today, but when they separated, they were not well maintained at the time of the separation. And one of the first things that they had to do when the town actually separated was come together and fix the roads. In 1765, town government positions were made, such as treasurer, and votes were held to see who would fulfill these positions. And actually, during this time, or this year, the town voted and agreed on the request of the creation of two new schools in the town of Fitchburg. In 1766, Wartime government positions were made, although more specific and reflective of the time period. Examples of these positions would be seller of leather and surveyor of wheat. There was more specific ones in there too, and a lot of them did reflect, due to the low population, everybody kind of had to fulfill like a weird niche in that town since it was a large community. Um, in 1767 to 1769, nothing really noteworthy happened in between these times. It was mostly actually construction of the roads and funding and construction of the schools. Construction of the roads and road development was a big part of Fitchburg at this time, and there was multiple from the town documents that were a big part of the resource for this project. A lot of the town documents were actually requests and payments for constructing roads. In 1770, the Nashua River actually flooded, and the Nashua River was actually seen as a detriment to the land far before they used a lot of it for the mills, and a lot of the mills took off. Um, People were worried about how it separated the town, how it was a big body of water, and an example of like one of the negatives is that it did flood, and the flood was actually large enough to destroy the bridges that were made to help people cross it. Not much is known about like the loss of life or if there was like any major damage past that, but it was large enough to obviously destroy the bridges, and the bridges were requested to be rebuilt, although this would take a lot of time for it to be rebuilt. In 1771, once again, nothing noteworthy. More construction and road development. 1772, while 2 schools were actually being funded and built, the town also requested 4 more smaller schools in each quarter of the town. In 1773, the town government received letters from the Committee of Correspondence in Boston. These committees would be a sort of organization focused around the Revolution at the time and the separation of the colonies in Britain. The town stated that they will stand with liberty in siding with the revolutionaries. In 1774, same as 1771, nothing really noteworthy. In 1775, the first doctor actually arrived at Fitchburg, Thaddeus McCarty. He was actually a Harvard graduate, and before he arrived, there was actually no professional doctors in Fitchburg. A lot of it was traditional medicine and a lot of just general stuff such as that. If you go into 1776, the town selected 5 men to represent the town of Fitchburg in compliance with the separation of Great Britain and its colonies. There was another convention made for that. And a smallpox hospital was built in the town by Thaddeus McCarty because smallpox is actually a very large issue at this time. It took a lot of lives. And the town received a letter from the General Congress about the separation from the colonies. 1777, more construction. 1778, participated in the drafting process for the Revolutionary War, as well as processes during the war, such as taxes for the war and just other processes that had to go through. In 1779, the town had to decide, or the town had a vote to decide to accept the new constitution that was put out. The vote was actually 45%, meaning that the town did decline. It was the opinion of the town to comply with the representatives and choose a state's convention. And they would actually go to a convention to discuss the Constitution and for the changes and revisions. And that reflected into 1780, where the town then agreed to the new form of the Constitution with the 65% approval. And the town had to vote for a new governor and other government positions for the new government. In 1780, the town accepted the new form of the Constitution. In 1781, the town had a vote on how much the old paper currency would be worth in the formation of the new government. The town put in efforts to smooth the transition for the change made for the currency. At this time, the pound and there was other silver currencies and whatnot were actually being discussed about how much they're being worth, since they aren't really connected to Britain and the other European countries, that they would be perceived in different wealth. And Fitchburg, obviously, being in the colonies, had to partake in the process of just the weird confusion at that time. In 1782, in this year, as last year as well, there's been a constant increase in requests to contribute more to the war efforts, more funding, and more requests for more soldiers for the draft and just choose and just more stuff for the war. In 1783, new continental taxes in place. The town was required to come up with a new method to collect tax in order to pay for the government. The government put out a payment, and the town was then forced to find a way to pay the money. So there wasn't like a set process of like, oh, tax the citizens this much, blah, blah, blah. It was just, here's the money that you owe. The town has to make that much money. Between 1784 and 1785, nothing noteworthy. There's more construction, especially on roads. There's a lot of road construction. And overall, during this time, while the Revolutionary War was going on, a lot of the efforts and focus were actually still inside the town. There wasn't like a lot of like super big focus on the wartime efforts in the town meetings. They would be like mentioned like once every 1 or 2 meetings. But a lot of it, as I said, was focused on town developments due to like the size of the town of itself being really small, and obviously wasn't really in great shape when it separated from Lunenburg. So it had to be self-sustainable first before it could focus on a lot of external issues.
Uh, through this project, we also wanted to include two major figures that were involved in Fitchburg during this time. Uh, their primary exhibits and stories are on our Omeka exhibits, but I can give you a quick rundown right now. John Fitch, of course, we discussed him earlier, is the founder of Fitchburg, hence his name. And has an adventurous history. As we said, his sort of conflict with the natives or Indians in the area, and how he and his family were kidnapped by them to Canada for ransom and didn't return for a year, where his wife tragically died. There's also a monument for John Fitch that is actually right here in Fitchburg and is in the same vicinity of where he was kidnapped, believe it or not. And as for John Payson, another John, he is a priest from Fitchburg with a rather tragic story. He actually comes from a family of priests, and for a he eventually when the first church of Fitchburg was found after a former priest before him denied the role of the pastor, the head pastor of the church. He eventually stood up and became the pastor. And during that time, he actually had a really big influence. Uh, more people were coming and praying with him. Many people actually looked up to him, supported him. However, he was heavily affected by the American Revolution. Though he didn't take part in the revolution itself, the like effects it had on the town of Fitchburg and him unfortunately caused him to fall victim to insanity. Believe it or not, he was eventually he rose up to become minister and served a pretty good time, around between 20 to 30 years, believe it or not, but was unfortunately discharged. Uh, Again, he fell to insanity. Many of his followers at the church, believe it or not, said that said that according to their views of him during that time, they said that he had like doubts in his ability to preach, and he would actually often apologize for it to his people. Uh, Payson would unfortunately take his own life in 1804, and he is buried right here in Fitchburg at the South Street Cemetery, which is a few minutes away from Fitchburg State. Again, that's only just a short snippet of these two. Their full stories are right on Omeka.
Uh, Through the Revolutionary War, 169 men from Fitchburg joined the Continental Army and fought for independence. And after the War and Revolution, upon return, much of the economic tyranny and poverty prevailed. Many moved away, and many new citizens actually joined the town. And there were lots of change, especially after the war. and there are a lot of new ideas and a new reconstruction of what Fitchburg would be, especially when you go into the Industrial Revolution with the mills. Brought a lot of economic opportunity to the town that didn't exist at that during this time.
Right. And again, these are the main places to visit: John Payson's grave, the John Fitch Monument, the Gibson Garrison, or at least the vicinity of where it once was, which is somewhere on Pearl Hill, and the Fitchburg Historical District, which is probably the easiest location to find. John Payson's grave, again, is at the South Street Cemetery, pretty easy to find, and the John Fitch Monument is a couple ways away, but it's right here in Fitchburg and is again in the same vicinity of when he was kidnapped by the Indians. Right. And that is it for our short overview of our project. Again, our full exhibit is right on Omeka. And many thanks to the Fitchburg Historical Society providing the data, which is where we got almost all of our data from. Thank you.